All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. My guest today is Deke Copenhaver. Deke Copenhaver. You can find out more about Deke at deke-copenhaver.com. Deke serves as a principal of Copenhaver Consulting and is the Forbes book author of the book, The Changemaker, The Art of Building Better Leaders. The Changemaker, The Art of Building Better Leaders. Copenhaver was elected mayor of Augusta, Georgia, serving from 2005 until 2014, and has spoken at national conferences on topics including city design, economic development, healthcare, veterans issues, and the nonprofit industry. A former radio show host himself, he authors, let me try that again, my lips must be wearing out. He authors a column on leadership published by the Georgia Municipal Association and has been recognized numerous times by the Georgia Trend magazine as one of the top 100 most influential Georgians. I'm excited to have him on the show. Deke Copenhaver, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bert, and thanks for having me.
You bet, you bet. All right, so talk about the book. You're sitting around, did you start the book while you were mayor, or is this something that you did after your stint as mayor?
No, I'll tell you, it's a funny story. So I didn't grow up having any interest in politics. I wanted to be a writer. And I actually was in banking and finance. Then I was in real estate and development. Then I ran a nonprofit. Then I was mayor for 9 years. And then 2 years ago, Forbes reached out to me. They have a team that does internet-based research to find people that are producing content on par with their brand. And when Forbes first reached out to me, I thought it was a joke or a scam, and I almost deleted the email. But it turned out to be true. And so I published it. We published it a year ago, May. But it's done real well. And so at the age of 51 years old, I was able to fulfill my lifelong dream.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Now, that's interesting that you didn't have any ambition to be a politician. So how did you go from not interested in politics to wanting to being mayor?
Well, being in the midst of campaign season, it's interesting to me. So I have a degree in political science, but I used to tell people that the only thing I could tell you is that to straighten things out, getting that degree was it would take a revolution. But in 2005, our former mayor prior to me, Bob Young, announced that he was taking post as Southeastern Regional Director for Housing and Urban Development. So I'd gone through a program the year before called Leadership Georgia, which is the oldest statewide leadership program in the nation. And Augusta had a terrible reputation for our politics. My graduation weekend from Leadership Georgia, I get off the bus in South Georgia and have the then governor's chief of staff, who was a friend of mine, Governor Purdue's chief of staff, Eric Tannenblatt, asked me. So we had our third current or former elected official go under indictment that week. And he said, "Man, what are you guys putting in the water up there?" And I'm like, "That's it. We need new leadership." And so I just saw a need. So I jumped in.
Oh man, that's wild. That is funny. That what do you call it? That your buddy said, that your buddy approached you and kind of, I don't know, I guess put that bug in your head, right? That something has to change.
Yeah, well, it's as I say, I'm very competitive, and spending a year going around the state, looking at other cities and other communities, and constantly hearing wherever I went, what is wrong with Augusta's politics? And as I say, when you have at that point 3 current or former elected officials, and it was black, white, male, female, and Democrat and Republican, I'm like, we got to do better than this. So I'm fortunately in Georgia, all local races, except for I believe sheriffs and judges and district attorneys are basically city councils and county commissions are nonpartisan. So I didn't have to deal with partisan politics. But I was talking about that with somebody the other week, and I'm like, it's great that cities elections are nonpartisan, but the fact that law enforcement and the judicial system are, that's a little bit, those things should be non-politicized, you would think, but we live in a political world.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let me ask you this. What do you define as a change maker?
Really, somebody who is not afraid to step out in faith, go against the status quo, to make a difference, and really to work on rallying people around a common cause. I think change-making leadership means leadership that brings people together, as opposed to what we're seeing in politics right now, but it's always been that way. It's so divisive. And when people say, when we're looking to, I think if we're going to come together, it's got to be at the grassroots level and the local level, right? Because I just did a recent blog for Forbes, and I said, if we're looking to political parties to heal our nation, that would be akin to me looking to the guy who broke my jaw in a bar fight and asking him to set it and think it's going to heal right. That's not necessarily what political parties are there for. But at the local level, if we could get more good people running for office, not for a career in politics, not to serve a party, but just to serve their community and whatever short amount of time, how much better would the nation be?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. Years ago, I was a very staunch Republican, and not to go into a lot of detail, but I ended up deciding at several years ago that no longer would I be just a Republican, that I would look for good people, whether they were Republican or Democrat, because really we need good people. If you just vote the party line, you're not always putting the community first. No.
And it's interesting. So I'll just a quick story. Actually, the year that I ran, I went through a church leadership retreat, and the moderator said, well, in church politics, I was on the board of deacons, said you've got 3% of the congregation that are for everything, and they're very vocal. 3% that are against everything, they're very vocal. 12% that are for but not as vocal, and 12% that are against but and not as vocal either. But then you've got the 70% in the middle that just want to see the church move forward. And so I governed to that 70%. I governed to the middle. And it got the extremes on either end very upset with me in certain circumstances, which I go into detail in the book. But I'm like, if I'm getting the far right and the far left mad at me, that's okay, because I'm governing to the majority. So, but I don't, and I agree with you. We just need good people, but it's difficult, as toxic as it's gotten right now, to get good people to run.
Well, and I think there's a lot of good people out there that are just, I think there's some people that have given up. They see that it's such a massive challenge. It's become such a what's the word I'm looking for? Unprofessional. Yeah, I mean, you're going to be attacked. Your family's going to be attacked. It's just, it has become the wild, wild west.
It really has. And my parents taught me to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And I did that when I was in office, and people were like, well, why don't you just go off on your colleagues? And I said, I don't care if I'm in politics or not. And you touched on the word, I'm going to be professional. I come from a business background, and I'm not going to just go against my character to please you.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. And I think you touched on another point. It has become, for lack of better terms, it has become a very, hate-filled environment. Facebook, I refer to Facebook as hate book. I mean, it's just nothing but people hating on each other. I stopped getting involved. I'm not very regular on Facebook anymore, but it's just become, I don't know, just a very barbaric situation out there. And I could see why a lot of good people are like, forget it. It's just not worth my time.
Well, I'll give you an example. And I when I was in office, that Facebook wasn't around when I first ran, or maybe it was, but it was in its infancy. And so I saw when it came along, somebody started a fan page for me. I had no idea what Facebook was, but I thought this is a good way to interact with citizens. But what you realize is, and it turned uglier over time, it was kind of novel to begin with, but I'm like, it gives people, if you're in elected office, a false sense of access, right? So if somebody asks me a public finance question at 11 o'clock on Saturday night, I'm not going to, it's something that would take, we've got finance people with the city, or we've got bond attorneys. But for somebody to think that the mayor is going to answer their question at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night is not realistic. But so in my final campaign, and I'm not going to pull any punches, I had somebody film my house while my wife and I weren't there. Wow. And basically his candidate was saying she wanted to end blight in all neighborhoods, but it was creepy. He's like, oh, the mayor lives in a nice neighborhood and all this. So after he posted it, I shared it and said, this is what it's like to be a politician. Well, the same guy, after I won my final election, posted on Facebook, I hope the mayor gets the flu and dies so that his candidate could be mayor. Wow. And that was when I got off of Facebook. I still am on there because it's a good way to promote the book. But I mean, that's how I tell people that, and they're like, that really happened? I'm like, oh yeah.
Well, and now that wouldn't even scratch the surface of that's what people are doing. It's gotten even worse.
That's tame compared to what we're seeing now. And I'm very active on social media, but LinkedIn for business is great to me.
Yes.
Instagram I like a whole lot. Twitter can get a little negative as well, but I like but it goes back to LinkedIn's professional and Instagram is positive. Yeah. And I would rather do what I did for 9 years, be positive and professional. And so this is a funny story too. I had lunch with Andrew Young one time. We were both on the board of visitors at the University of Georgia. And it was just a great conversation about what it's like to be a mayor. And I said, but yeah, everybody has their, critics and cynics. He said, what are your critics and cynics say? I said, they say that I'm too positive and I'm not controversial. And he's like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, yeah, if that's what you're going to tar and feather me with, I think I'll take that all day. I mean, that's, you wouldn't say that about most politicians.
Yeah, that's actually a nice compliment, really. It's
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about this. One of the things that you say is leadership fails to bring people together. So what's the first step in bringing people together? Talk about this.
It really, it's to physically do it, I think. Now we do it online a little bit more, but I'll give you an example. So my first day in office, we started a mayor's prayer breakfast. And for open to all denominations, we for years went to, large houses, houses of worship throughout the community. We went to the synagogue, we went to affluent churches, poor churches, black churches, white churches. But over time, what happened was, and 15 years later, we're still doing it. We had one this morning. We were challenged by the Freedom from Religion Foundation when I was in office to cease and desist because it was called the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. We switched to the name Community Prayer Breakfast and just moved on. But what happened was, and to this day, you have people from across the city of different socioeconomic backgrounds, different faiths, different races that may never have met each other, that have developed these great relationships and friendships. So I think finding a way to physically bring people together, but it's got to be in your heart to want to bring people together, because somebody that doesn't have, unity and in their heart, trying to convene a meeting of people from all walks of life, it doesn't really work. You've got to have the sincerity there as well.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head there. It does have to come from the heart. You look at some of these people who did not have a snowball's chance of accomplishing what they set out to accomplish, but because they were driven from the heart, they were sincere, they were able over time amass a group of support and actually accomplish the impossible.
Absolutely. Well, I talk about it in the book that the only power that a change-making leader, or just a leader in general, in my opinion, should concern themselves with is the power to inspire. Because no one individual can do anything alone, but if you can inspire people around you to work with you, there really isn't anything you can't accomplish. And I think what I see sometimes in elected leadership, in business leadership, and when people get out of touch with the people they serve, that's sort of a dangerous place to be in. And if you, as a leader, perceive yourself above those you serve, it's really difficult to bring people together in that scenario.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, what you're talking about there is that component, very vital component, humility. And when you get around people that are highly successful, but are yet rooted in, they're grounded, they're humble. They don't think they're above you. They are, it's an incredible thing. It's awe-inspiring to be around somebody who's achieved so much, but they're just so grounded. To me, it's awe-inspiring, and it doesn't happen that often, but it is very awe-inspiring.
It is, and I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of famous people, and the ones that always impress me are the ones that, like, I'll give you an example. Ben Crenshaw, great golf champion. Well, while I was in office, we had the Mayor's Masters reception every Monday night of the Masters to honor a past champion. And literally, so Ben Crenshaw, for your viewers, that Masters champion, just, golf legend, golf Hall of Fame. But his mother grew up in the same small town as my father did, Tazewell, Virginia. But we had never met. But he was probably one of the nicest people I've ever met. I mean, with all the success in his golfing career, he was about as humble as you could get. But even in politics, I'd say our past governor, before Governor Kemp, Governor Nathan Deal, just accomplished so much for this state. But I knew him while he was running the first time. He gave us a 2-term governor, but I just, in seeing the political governor's race that year, I thought, golly, do we want either of these two guys? When I came to know Governor Deal, he had a wonderful humility about him, which I think is unusual in politics, but that's what impresses me. Joe Riley, who was longtime mayor of Charleston, they called him America's mayor. He was a mentor of mine, but just true leaders and just a humble man. And you can't help, to me, but as you mentioned, to be inspired and drawn to that. And that's another thing, is that, my dad raised me to be a gentleman. And has it become a bad thing to be a gentleman in this world? Or, you got to be the guy that is willing to do anything to succeed. And I don't think that's the case.
Right. Well, and I think what's happened is people, I'll say unsophisticated, arrogant people will take kindness and generosity and somebody who's humble as weak. And that's obviously a mistake, because you can be ferocious and still be humble. You can be competitive and still be a humble individual. I mean, they're not exclusive. And I think that some people will look at somebody who doesn't have the outer killer, armor on, and kind of discount that person. And that's that arrogance, that they think that there's somebody that the way they operate is somehow better than the way the other person operates. But humility is very powerful, and I think it's very important as a leader, because you mentioned bringing people together, and I think humility does that. We see what happens when leaders don't have that humility quotient, and there's constant turnover. People are unhappy. Things aren't getting done. The blame game is constantly being, played. It's a completely different leader.
It is. And I talk a lot in the book about vulnerability. So I was doing a local TV show here with a friend of mine, and he said, well, you talk about in the book about being vulnerable. Can you do that in politics? And I said, absolutely. He's like, can you do it all the time? I told my friend, I said, Brad, that's what connected me to the people I serve, because I admitted, I'm not perfect. I admitted I don't have all the answers. And vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. To get up on a stage or to have a conversation with somebody and completely open yourself up. Now, that's a whole lot harder than being guarded and secretive and, just to open yourself up to the world. But I get into this too. So I'm competitive as anything. I mean, I want to win, but more so than that, I want my team to win. And my dad always taught me the value of sportsmanship, to be, a gracious winner, but also a gracious loser. And I've learned more from my failures in life than I ever have from my successes, to be perfectly honest. But that humility and vulnerability are key, because that connects you with people. And if you're able to connect with people, you can connect other people together. And I think it's a really cool thing to feel like you're swept up in something that's bigger than you. And yes. I think that's what good leadership is. If you can make the people around you feel valued, secured, and feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, that's the way you achieve sustainable success.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let me ask you this. How can a change maker make a difference? Talk about this.
Oh gosh. I go back to the leap of faith, but I tell people that leadership knows no age. And a big part of leadership to me is actually doing what nobody else wants to do. So when I first said I was going to run for mayor, I got the question, I had a good job. I had a happy family, but they said, well, why do you want to do that? And I said, well, why do you want to get caught up on all that? And I said, because if everybody has that attitude, nothing's going to change. And so to make a change, it takes going against the status quo, which is, not fun at times, because there are people that profit off the status quo remaining in place. So, but the first thing is just to take that first step forward, face your fears, and, don't be afraid to go against the status quo. It drives me crazy. And I see it in local governments. I see it in businesses but we've always done it this way. And it's amazing to me that even after, as we entered into the pandemic and to this point, I still see people out there in leadership positions trying to cling to the status quo. And I tell them, look, there's no status quo to cling to anymore. We're in a completely different world. You've got to figure out how to pivot. You can't just continue to do things the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question, but before I ask you this question, I want to I want to ask you this first question. I should, because I'd like to get your take on this. So what have you found? What are some of the biggest change makers in American history for you?
Wow. Abraham Lincoln was definitely one. I was listening to an interview with the gentleman the other day and said, well, you think that times are difficult right now? Imagine Lincoln. He basically took office, and 2 weeks later, a civil war broke out. So Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr. is a hero of mine. And I think for, a movement based on peace to achieve the results that he did with regards to civil rights, John F. Kennedy would be another one from a political standpoint, what he did, to get us to the moon. I say Ronald Reagan for me too. I came of age during the Reagan years, and there were Reagan Democrats, which is something we wouldn't see these days, but he had the ability to strike the correct tone during tragedy, which I think is pretty amazing. But there are so many out there, but those are just some of the ones that influenced me. In Georgia, where I live, Governor Carl Sanders was from Augusta. He was elected in his 30s, I believe, in 1962. And at that point, there was a debate as to whether Atlanta was going to become the thriving metropolis of the South or Birmingham. And so they, in Georgia, elected a progressive, Democrat. In Alabama, they elected somebody that was against the civil rights movement. And so that really tipped the balance in Georgia's favor and Atlanta's favor. But there are examples throughout history that we don't even know about. But I always look for the examples of change-making leadership because I learn from them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I love Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks.
Oh, yeah.
I think is unbelievable. It's one thing, it's anyway, not to get too much into it, but I think what Rosa Parks did was incredible. And as you said, to do this, knowing that you're putting yourself in harm's way, but yet you are trying to do it peacefully. You're not trying to do it violently. So one of my current favorite change makers, when you were talking about the status quo or breaking the status quo, would have to be Elon Musk. I think that he's done some incredible things. I think that, he's been told numerous times, it's not going to work. This is the way it's always been done,
And that's to me, I would say, and that's a great example of a change-making leader. But basically, I would guarantee you, at every change-making leader, at some point, somebody calls you crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's a crazy idea. You'll never be able to do that. But growing up, I remember my sister always saying, just don't tell him he can't do something. Just do not tell him he can't do something because it's a challenge.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, you know what? It's incredible. It's incredible what happens when there's a good leader in the mix. I'm going to probably butcher this saying, but there's a saying that says something about, a committed small group of people, can change the world. And that's all there's ever been, right? Is a small committed group of people. And in that small committed group of people, you have a leader who can keep those people inspired and focused. And that's, to me, incredible. And like you said, there are literally probably tens of thousands of these very special leaders that nobody's ever heard of, but they were special to their community. They were change makers, in their communities. And it's just incredible, what a good leader can do for an organization, a community, whatever. It's an incredible thing.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's something that we seem to be lacking?
Well, yes, and I think the stories are out there, but basically what we see in politics and the mainstream media are the extremes. But one of the really cool things about my book is that it's been embraced by the younger generation. So several weeks ago, just as an example, I had a young man from Spain. He's 19 years old. His name is Jericho, one of the top 200 young leaders in Spain. So he reached out to me to tell me how the book had inspired him. So last fall, I had nothing to do with this, but the University of Texas, El Paso's Student Engagement and Leadership Center found the book and worked it into a program that they had called Powerful Pages. I knew nothing about it until I saw students at UTEP throwing up pictures on Instagram of them reading the book. So I have, during the pandemic, it's been interesting for me in a way because my business model was built around, coming into this year just doing speaking engagements, and had a great one at UTEP. And then on March 10th, the world flipped upside down. But I think now with social media, when properly used, we have a platform to connect those change-making leaders and to learn from each other. But one of the things that is inspiring to me about all my young followers or friends or whatever on Instagram is how positive they are and how positive their posts are. And so many of the students I met at UTEP, I tell that generation, I just did a podcast with a young lady out of Australia that's a millennial rock star in the smart communities field, but it's reciprocal, right? Because they say I inspire them, but they inspire me. But it gives me to see a new generation of leaders coming up that are, I believe, going to do things differently, and to know how interconnected they are. That's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So we're short on time. So I wanted to ask you this question before we run out of time. In the book, you talk about, let's see if I can pop it up here. Oh, here it is. The 7 attributes of a change maker. What are the 7 attributes of a change maker?
Creativity, courage, connecting, listening, transparency, composure, and the last, that is one of the most important ones, is character. Yeah,
that's incredible. I like that. All right. So I want to pop this up real quick. If somebody wants to reach out to you, they can go to Deke-Copenhaver.com, Deke-Copenhaver.com. And real quick, the book is The Changemaker, The Art of Building Better Leaders. Deke, it's been a lot of fun having you on the show, and I look forward to having you back again and talk more about leadership.
Absolutely, Bert. It's been a pleasure, man. Have a great day.
All right. You too, man.